we have put together a collection of teams that we're expecting to have an improvement off their 2023 results. And so we're going to begin in the Big Ten with, hold on, I know somebody was in the tailgate early today. Yes, Brandon, we hear you. At 9:38 a.m., jumping in, getting the tailgate started. Brandon says, is Nebraska a turnaround team this year, or would you consider them turned around from last year? I think that if some of these, we might not all agree. Tom, our Big Ten aficionado, you think Nebraska is poised after a 5-7 season in 2023 for a big turnaround here in year 2 with Matt Rule?
Chip, there are some things that you could just set your watch to. It is April 3rd. It is snowing outside here in Chicago, and we are talking about, is this year Nebraska's good again? It's just every single year, this is what happens on April 3rd. I think that if you look at the situation, I think there's a decent chance that they take a step forward. It's hard to say what the Big Ten is going to look like. So you can't make the same kind of assumptions that you have in years past based on, the Big Ten West, the Big Ten East, because you've got all these new teams coming in, but you look at the situation Nebraska has, the schedule is not a bear. I feel like last year, considering what they got from the quarterback position last year, they were about as good as you can hope for, just because the turnovers and all this kind of stuff, they kept putting themselves in holes. But defensively, I thought they were sound. I thought they had some good skill position players. I thought they were okay on the offensive line. So now you come back into the second year of Rule's tenure here, like you add in Raiola at quarterback. And I've talked about this before. I don't think he's a true freshman, so you should always temper your expectations. But I don't think he has to be great for Nebraska to take a significant step forward, considering how bad the QB play was there last year. So even if he's just like a below average Power 5 quarterback, I think Nebraska's got a chance to not get to the Big Ten title game or anything, but definitely get to a bowl game, which if you're Nebraska, it's been a while since you were to a bowl game. So just getting there, I feel like, is a significant step forward if they do it. And I think they can.
It's not foolproof, but just on a very basic level, you can just kind of sort teams that were like not good in close games, and then also run another column for like what was your turnover EPA in close games. And Nebraska was by far the worst Power 5 team in terms of turnover EPA loss. So expected points added in this case, expected points subtracted due to all of their turnovers. They were 1-5 in single score games. They don't even really have to be that much better of a team to achieve a better record, because the schedule is quite friendly. I mean, this is kind of I don't say this is the year for Matt Rule, because it's not, but it is an important year. Like, there is pressure on him to show some growth, because this schedule, to the extent that we can know what the Big Ten is a bit of a gift, right? Like, there are certain nobles. Guess what, guys? Ohio State's probably pretty damn good. Oregon's probably pretty good. Penn State, even if they don't get any better than they were last year, is still a really good team. And I have a hard time seeing Michigan drop off like significantly. And Wisconsin probably won't suck because Fickell's a good coach and they still have good players. So they miss a lot of those teams, which means you need to like win a lot of these coin flips, especially these coin flips that are in poor situations. O-line questions. They're putting a lot on Raiola if he's going to be the dude. I do love that they made that little change at offensive coordinator, so I'm encouraged by that. And it'd be hard to be worse. If they are, then you got major problems, because like you should win 7-8 ball games against this schedule.
Like last year, the whoopsie daisy rate on this team was the worst in the country by far. It was like 6.7%. And to put that in perspective, I think the average in the country was probably about 1.9. So they were about 3 times worse than the average team. So you also I've seen some comments in the chat about like the 1-score loss thing, because that has been the case in recent years for Nebraska. They've been really bad in 1-score games. But to me, just as anecdotal watching that team last year, I felt like in previous seasons, they kept losing 1-score games because of bad coaching. I think last year they were just losing 1-score games because they couldn't hold on to the football. I don't think coaching had anything to do with it. So I think there has been an upgrade in that department. And I think if you just do a better job of holding on to the football, it'll take care of those 1-score games.
I don't know. They did allow Jeff Sims to throw that Minnesota game. That interception he had was maybe one of the worst interceptions of the year, considering the situation. I am willing to go boldly out on a limb and say they go bowling. Like, and they better. But like, I'm with Bud. Like, I think I don't know if I'd go 8, but I think 7's reasonable, and I think 6 is hopefully the floor, because if it's not, then I do think you have bigger issues. And I just think if you look historically at what Matt Rule has done, like, I think you should see a jump in year 2, just players buying in to him, getting more of his fundamentals taught, the system more comfortable on both sides of the football. We saw the massive jump year 1 to year 2 from 1-11 to 7-6 in Baylor. That situation was way worse that he inherited. You saw that jump. And then the following season was when you saw the 11-1. So I think you'll see a better team than last year. So yeah, I think there'll probably be, 6 or 7 wins is probably where I feel more comfortable. If Raiola is special, then I think you're talking 8.
Oh, I'm so glad I didn't put this information in the doc so I can hit you with it off the top. Right now, FanDuel Sportsbook, make every moment more. Nebraska regular season wins 7.5. Over plus 134, under minus 164. Right now, all the win totals at this point are going to have crazy juice on either side, but 7.5 is the number.
I'd go under without seeing Raiola
under.
even in a spring game yet.
With the plus juice, I would go over.
Right. I mean, as like a value proposition when you're looking at the prices and the potential payoff, like I get that, but it is funny because I think Nebraska is a turnaround team because we will see Nebraska bowling. And I think taking that step is so important given the way that the Cornhuskers have struggled. However, I see the 7.5 and I'm like, oh, okay. So either 7-5 or 8-4. That is a big step. That is a big turnaround to go from where Nebraska has been to now all of a sudden being, one of the 8-win teams, one of the 8+ win teams in the Big Ten. That means you're probably, top half easily in the Big Ten.
I think if I'm a Nebraska fan and you look at the Big Ten this year, there's the team that's going to win the league, and then there's the at-large berth contenders. I think that's their own separate tier. I think Nebraska should be competing to be at the top of that second tier of teams where they're not really in the playoff picture, but you look at them as a solid Big Ten team.
Let's keep it right
you
there.
Have Washington in year 2 or in tier 2?
Yeah, this year I do.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah. We're on the same page, and there's kind of 4 at the top, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, let's keep it right there in the Big Ten. Indiana, 3-9 last season. Tom Allen is fired, and they go get one of the top coaches at the Group of 5 level. Curt Cignetti did such a good job taking that James Madison program, not only being able to compete at the top of the FCS as the Dukes had done, leading them into the Sun Belt. Just a great start to their FBS tenure. Danny, I know you were a Tom Allen guy, but you also, Curt Cignetti's been on the show too. We got a lot of love going on there. We've got Curtis Rourke showing up from the transfer portal, a few other portal additions as well that certainly show an increased commitment to trying to make Indiana football good. Do you see a turnaround for Indiana in 2024?
I think they'll be better. I think you'll see a initial bump. I do think Cignetti brings, I mean, he's out there banging drum big time that basketball game saying they're taking down Michigan, Ohio State. We can slow that down just a little bit, but I think you'll see a better football team. I think there's something too, just the newness of somebody, Tom Allen, I thought he did a great job. I think it was similar. It was a great motivator, defensive minded coach, but I do think there's an energy around Cignetti that kind of infuses a new life that will get you that initial bump, how far it goes. And then it's more of like, well, what's the ceiling for anybody at Indiana? And it's probably what you saw with Tom Allen in a COVID year when there weren't fans at a lot of games and there were some factors involved that gave you kind of an assist. And it's just one of those programs. Bud says it all the time. Somebody's got to take the losses. It does feel like Indiana is that program, but I think they'll be better than 3 wins.
They're going to be better than 3 wins in September.
Yeah. It should be.
I mean, they start out FIU, Western Illinois, at UCLA, host Charlotte, host Maryland. And then they go at Northwestern, host Nebraska, host Washington, at Michigan State, host Michigan, at Ohio State, host Purdue. I mean, they're only like big dogs twice. Mm-hmm. Everything else is either favored or in theory winnable. So you basically transport the best of that JMU team over. Like that JMU team would have gone 6-6 against this schedule.
Oh, and the whole staff, by the way, too. I mean, it is the JMU.
Elijah Surratt can play.
Bloomington.
The receiver they got from JMU, I think, is a really nice get. part of this is like, does Curtis Rourke actually have the goods now?
Mhm.
What is Curtis Rourke in 2024? Because last year he kind of looked like a shell of himself.
Mm.
Yeah, that's really what this season is going to come down to for me with the Hoosiers. Is Curtis Rourke healthy? How well is he playing? How well is he performing in the Big Ten? Because it's there's talent on that roster. There was talent on that roster last year. I just feel like they kind of gave up the ghost a little bit. Like you go back to the opener against Ohio State and like they lost and they never really had a chance to win, but they made it really difficult for the
The
Buckeyes
Penn
for the
State
most part.
game. You
Yeah,
remember
the Penn
that?
State game. Like, they were not a pushover bad team. They just didn't have enough juice offensively, I think, to win most of their games. But I think if Rourke brings that, you talked about Surratt coming in. I think McCulley, the guy who also another big-bodied receiver for them, who originally entered the portal and then came out and returned, like they've got weapons in that game, so or in that passing game. So if Rourke can stay healthy, this is a team that I think could flirt with a bowl game. But they're still, it's going to be difficult. But I do think they made the right hire, and I do think long term, like Kurt Cignetti knows how to build a program, and I think long term this is going to be a very solid hire for the Hoosiers. It's just how good they'll be this year will depend on the QB.
A little bit questions on their offensive line for me. Like, they did lose some decent guys. What's his name went to Colorado, and then Carpenter went to Miami. The receivers they have are pretty damn good by Big Ten standard. They have whose receivers would be like snap call take over them? Ohio State, Oregon,
yeah,
probably Michigan if we count the tight end. I mean, they have top half of the Big Ten receiving core instantly, and if they get decent kind of quarterback play and any protection, there's enough games where the opposing defensive line just isn't any good to where like they're going to have time to chuck it around.
5.5.
I lean under, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I lean under with this one too, but with the coaching change, definitely one to keep an eye on, especially with all that portal action, both in and out.
Yeah.
So let's keep it in the Big Ten. One more here. The Michigan State Spartans. It was a tough season last year. Mel Tucker gets thrown off the carousel in September. You're kind of a lame duck season the rest of the way. You think that you're going to see these signs of life. I mean, I remember on the Locks pod, we kept coming back around and saying, maybe this is when they're playing for pride. And then Penn State pasted them. 4-8 by the end of the season. Jonathan Smith gets hired out from Oregon State. We have largely championed Jonathan Smith and the work that he did in Corvallis. Danny, how do you see Michigan State's outlook heading into next season?
I think this is probably one of the more challenging ones to do, because I think when you talk Indiana, even Nebraska, you feel like you haven't seen it in a while. And it's kind of like hard to project where they are. Michigan State wasn't that far removed when they're paying Mel Tucker, $95 million, because they were really good. And they were a team that could compete and be in that upper tier of the Big Ten. I think it's going to be way more challenging for Jonathan Smith. I think this is a program that is hurt by the new additions that are coming in from the Pac-12. I think where they fall in the Big Ten takes a step back until I'm proven wrong. I think talent-wise, what they're playing with, I think Jonathan Smith is a clear upgrade. But I just worry how they're going to do. And there's some early gotta-have-it type games for them if you do want to, go bowling in year one and kind of start turning this thing in the right direction.
Real quick follow on that one. So 4 new additions to the Big Ten from the Pac-12, Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA. When you're talking, I agree with you. I think they're moving down. Do you see it as, 2 definitely above, and then you're fighting for space with the other 2? Like, how do you see them sort of slide?
Yes, but I think right now as it stands, they're probably below, and they have to claw their way into that tier, and they have to prove to me.
I think if right now, I would put Michigan State in the UCLA tier. I would put Washington, Oregon, and USC above the Spartans at the moment.
I had Oregon and USC ahead, and then I had Washington and UCLA kind of in that same middle ground right there.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. For me, for the Spartans this year, again, this is another really good hire that I'm very high on. I think Aiden Childs is going to be a very, very important part to how good Michigan State is. And I think Jonathan Smith coming out right away and saying he's the starter, there's not going to be a competition. I think gives you an idea of what he thinks of Childs, and I think it's good for them to prepare for him to be the starter instead of entertaining a quarterback battle. Problem for the Spartans is every single year the secondary has been crap and the offensive line has been crap for a few years now. And like, you look at the skill positions they've had, there's a lot of dudes in the NFL right now who will soon be in the NFL who have been wearing a Michigan State uniform in recent seasons. Like Keon Coleman was at Michigan State. Jaden Reed was at Michigan State. They've had plenty of talent. They've had some decent talent in the front seven, but in the secondary, they've been awful. And offensive line, like, that was one thing, like during the D'Antonio era, like when they got to the playoff, when they were one of the best teams in the Big Ten, when they were winning the East, they were beating the hell out of teams on their offensive line. They haven't done that in 5 years. I can't remember the last time I watched a Michigan State offensive line and I thought, oh, that's a good unit. They're usually getting their butts kicked. So if I'm Jonathan Smith, you look at the Oregon State offensive line recent years, pretty good. They're going to have a first-round pick at tackle this year in the draft from Oregon State, and I think that they did a good job developing there. I think if I'm Jonathan Smith, that is one of my biggest priorities as far as getting this program back to where it needs to be. But as for 2024, like I said, it's the same situation as Indiana. How good is Aiden Childs and how fast? If he is he could be, we've talked about the Big Ten quarterback. Who's the best quarterback in the league? We don't know. If Aiden Childs can be at least in the conversation as the best quarterback in the Big Ten, this Michigan State team could be pretty good. If not, they're probably going to be mediocre.
Yeah, first of all, Mahalzik there, who was at Oregon State, the O-line coach, now at Michigan State, like that guy can coach. Like he knows. That's
the biggest hire Smith or biggest coach he brought with him to me.
Totally. Yeah. Like that guy is just universally respected. They do a great job. He's also the run game coordinator. My problem here is, like, if you swap the schedule with Indiana or with Nebraska, I've got Michigan State bowling easily.
Yeah.
The thing is, while Indiana and especially Nebraska got the easy side of the Big Ten coin, somebody has to get the hard side, and that somebody is named Michigan State. In a month's time, Ohio State at Oregon, host Iowa at Michigan. Hello. Like, there is a bye in there, but that ain't easy. So now look, you should beat Florida Atlantic to open, but FAU has some athletes. Like, you're not likely to lose to them, but if you play an absolute disaster of a game, like they jacked around with the sidelines game, Central Michigan last year for a little bit, like Central Michigan did for about 10 minutes, and then they got it together. At Maryland in week 2 is like not super easy. September Maryland is a thing, and it's usually pretty damn good. Prairie View, that's a dub. At Boston College, like, that's just annoying enough and just early enough to where you're not like a 10-point favorite at BC. I don't think. Host Indiana, at Illinois, host Purdue, host Rutgers. Like, there is a real chance you could finish 4-0, but you're probably a slight dog at Illinois. So, yeah, this schedule is not friendly for year one success, but it's hard. I would not say a great money-making strategy is consistently betting against Jonathan Smith. So, like, it's probably one, like, I may not bet the over, but I'm not loading up on the under, pending what happens with the transfer portal. And that's actually something I think we should say with all of these guys, because that thing opens in about 2 weeks.
Great call. 5.5, by the way, is there's a lot of, I went through and got all the 3 and 4 win teams from last year. Then I also looked at the win totals, looked at the difference. This is a very small difference in terms of what your win total was last year, what your line is this year. 4 wins last year, 5.5 is the win total, over at plus 124 as of earlier this week over on FanDuel Sportsbook. So, yeah, if you want to say Jonathan Smith, that's my betting angle, and just go over 5.5. He'll figure out a way to get him to a bowl. I'm not going to hate it, but I don't know if I see enough on paper to be able to throw all my weight behind it at this point in the process.